40th birthday, my wife planned a surprise trip to New York City. That was about a year ago or so. It's really funny. Anyway, so she plans this party, and then she has my sister-in-law also plan a surprise trip for my twin brother. And so we meet in New York City, and some friends had told us about this amazing restaurant in the meatpacking district, and we had made a reservation. So we go down there for dinner the first night, and we get there, and the host walks us to our table, and she shows us where she wants us to sit. And I looked at it, and I was like, ugh. And so I called her. I said, hey, can we talk? Can we talk? And because the table she wanted us to sit at was this long table with like seats for 15 or 18 people. And I said, hey, excuse me, there's already, maybe you didn't notice, there's already people sitting at the table, and we'd like a table just for 4 of us. And she said, maybe you don't understand. This is called a community table. And people in New York City love the community table. She said, I think you'll like it. Why don't you sit down? And so we did. And so we sat down, and we met the people next to us and the people at the end of the table, and they told us about life in New York City. And pretty soon we felt like we were part of the community. But isn't it true? We don't eat together so much anymore. The average American eats at least one fast food meal a day. 1 out of every 5 meals that you eat are in your car while you're driving. That's why we have so many bad drivers in Chandler and Gilbert. That's what's happening there. Do you know that fewer than half of Americans even eat 1 meal a day at a table with their family in their home? And now researchers are finding that when you eat meals alone, it's not so good for you. But Jesus, when he was here on earth, he talked a lot about dinners and meals. Some say that Jesus was a foodie because he liked food so much. And we've talked about tables and meals here at the Grove before. But as we talk about community and wrap up our series, I feel like we have to talk about the meals that Jesus ate, because they're teaching us something valuable that's at the core of who we are as Christians and as people at the Grove and as followers of Jesus Christ. So Jesus, some people say he liked food so much that he ate his way through the New Testament. It seems like every other chapter in the book of Luke is about a meal, or Jesus is teaching about a meal. And Jesus wasn't just eating a little bit of food. He was eating more than enough, it seemed like. In fact, the writer of the book of Luke, he says this. He says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. So Jesus did not come with an explosion in the sky. He didn't come with a band of angels playing trumpets. Luke says the Son of Man came eating and drinking. His critics, he ate so much that his critics said he's a glutton. In fact, some of the religious leaders came to him and they said, Jesus, what's going on here? They said, the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees, they fast and they pray. They're very spiritual. They fast. They don't eat much. But they said, your disciples, they eat so much. They like so much food. Because Jesus was showing us something. Jesus was showing us a picture of the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. Because a meal is more than food, isn't it? A meal is a warm welcome. A meal is an invitation not just into someone's home, it's an invitation into their life. And so for Jesus, sharing a meal was not just a metaphor for the kingdom of heaven on earth. For him, the kingdom of heaven was actually coming to earth through that meal and that dinner. It was happening in miniature right there in front of everybody. And so today, I want to take a minute or take our time to talk about dinners and tables and Jesus' kind of meals. So if you're going to have a dinner, all dinners have to start with a table. And the moment, if you think about it, some of our best moments in life happen around a table. There are conversations that you have that will last a lifetime that you will remember around a table. There are connections that are made at a dinner table that you can't make anywhere else. It's a powerful thing when someone invites you to come into their home and sit at their table, because you're being invited into a very private part of their life. They're coming in and you're coming in to experience what life is like. They're saying when someone invites you to the table, they're saying, I want to get to know you better. I want to form this bond with you. Being invited to the table is a very powerful thing. I think Jesus used tables to create an all-inclusive society, an all-inclusive community, an all-inclusive family. For Jesus, I use this language, the table is level. Have you ever been to a restaurant where the table rocked on you the whole time? Like you're cutting your steak and everything you're drinking is spilling. It's the most annoying thing to sit at a table that's not level. For Jesus, the table was level. It was a place where everyone sat together as one. You've heard me talk about this. And so, because here's what Jesus says in Luke chapter 14. He says, then he told the man who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, stop inviting only your friends and brothers and relatives or rich neighbors. Otherwise, they may invite you in return and you'll be repaid. Instead, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you. So Jesus is reminding us that when you have a meal, invite in the outsider, invite in the other. At Jesus' kind of table, and you've heard me say this before, Jesus' kind of table, it's a picture of the kingdom of heaven on earth. His table is for people of every race, every background, every nationality, every socioeconomic level. And we all come together as one. So when we built this building, this worship space, we wanted everyone to be reminded of that value. You've heard me say this. So we have these big community tables around the room here. And even we have some bistro tables so that hopefully you'll sit down with strangers and get to know them. But it's a reminder that at Jesus' table, everyone is wanted and welcome. Well, after we had been in this room for a few months, we started to talk about the table, and I said, we have the tables, we talk about what they mean, but we never eat at them. And someone said, well, we serve communion, but let's be honest, when you eat communion these days, it kind of leaves you hungry, all right? There's just not a whole lot to it, you know? Maybe you get a piece of bread this big, it's just not a whole lot. And so we started talking about, well, let's have a meal where everybody at the Grove is there. And then we came up, you've heard us say this, with this crazy idea of putting a table through the Grove where we could invite everyone. So we announced it. And we started to set this table. I have a picture of the table here. And we put tablecloths on the whole thing and covered it. And we had somewhere around 500 people sign up the first time we did this. And as we set the table, and Paul and I stood at the end, last service they said this was not straight. I mean, it's just helped me out. Anyway, so Paul and I stood at the end of this table, standing right here, this view that you're seeing, and we look at it, and we both said, man, we're never going to fill this thing. And it started to scare us. This is going to bug everybody. All right, all right, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, some of you have noticed that. And so Paul says this, he's famous for this line. Paul said, if we fill the table, I'll eat my shoe. I don't know why he said that. Who eats their shoe? Anyway, so we're kind of in panic mode, like this is the worst idea we've had out of all the bad ideas. But then at about 4:45, when we had told people to show up, people started streaming in through the trees. And people had invited their friends and their neighbors. And then the worst thing happened, and actually it was the best thing happened. We ran out of chairs and tables. We filled every seat. So we're running up to the children's buildings and stealing tables and chairs and stringing up more lights. And someone brought in a generator for one end of the thing. And we sat everybody down at one table. It was amazing. The next time, I have a picture, the next time we did it, we had more than 1,000 people at a table. In fact, I invited some pastor friends, Pastor Stoll and Pastor Jesus, and they brought people from their churches, and we all sat together as one. In fact, Pastor Jesus said he had people from 12 different South American nations sitting at the table. I think that was a Jesus kind of table, if you ask me. And here's what's so beautiful about it. So Paul in the New Testament, he's telling the church, he says, if you're going to be God's kind of people, then start to have meals together. He encourages us of all the the New Testament churches. And then he asked them to do something revolutionary. He said, I want the wealthy to sit down with the poor. I want the Jews to sit down with the foreigners and people who are the non-Jews, people from other countries. He said, I even want you to sit down with slaves at the same table. No one had heard of this before. No one had done it. And Jude, as he's leading a church, do you know what Jude called these feasts among Christians that were for everyone? He called them agape feast. He says, you're invited to the agape, to the love feast. And that's what it is. It's a table for everyone. Well, once you have a table, every meal needs a chair. When I was a freshman in college at Biola University in California, the first Thanksgiving came around and my parents were still in Africa, so clearly I had nowhere to go for Thanksgiving, but fortunately a really nice family that we had gotten to know invited me and my twin brother over for Thanksgiving dinner. Well, as we got closer to Thanksgiving, I realized that my friend MT I'd grown up with in Liberia, MT was a Liberian. I realized that MT didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving dinner. And so I called the hostess who had invited us to dinner, this really sweet woman, and I said, hey, would it be okay, fine, if I brought MT with us? And there was a long pause, a little bit of an awkward pause, and then she said, Palmer, I'm sorry to say no, that won't work. She said, we don't have enough chairs for MT. Man, I hung up and I was like, doggone it, who can't find one more chair? Isn't there one more chair in the office or out on the back porch? Or isn't there a chair in the garage? Or can't you go get a chair from one of your neighbors? And that Thanksgiving, MT said he ate tacos that night when I saw him later that night. Went to a taco shop. And I kind of wish I had stayed and gone with him because I was a little salty as we had Thanksgiving dinner that day. Here's the thing about chairs, is that the Jewish people have this amazing tradition. It's called asfaizen. Asfaizen means guest. And the Jewish people at Passover always leave one seat, one chair, one place setting empty, so that if there's an uninvited guest, someone who just shows up at your door, you always have a seat for them, someone like MT, that there's room at your table. And some Christians have picked up on that tradition. There's a lot of Christians who at Thanksgiving they practice asfaizen, and they leave one chair, one place setting empty, just in case a guest shows up at Thanksgiving. We had one Thanksgiving with an empty chair. What happened is my son Byron was away at graduate school up in Portland, and he called and he said, hey, I'm not going to be able to come home for Thanksgiving. My fiance has to work, and so we're just going to stay in Portland. And I tried to talk him into finding a way for them to come down, and they just couldn't. And so Thanksgiving Day was going fine, but then when we sat down at dinner, Byron's chair was empty, and he always sat in the same chair, and there was no one there. And so his brothers, it seemed like all they wanted to talk about was Byron, and because clearly they missed having Byron at the table, and they started to talk about how Byron was always spilling drinks. You know, there wasn't a meal we had when Byron didn't spill a glass of milk or Coke all over the place, whatever he's drinking. And then they talked about how Dad would sit here, but Byron would sit way down there because he always had his elbows on the table, and Dad would try to poke him with a fork, to get the elbows out. So he sat by Mom, so Mom didn't say anything. And so so they were laughing about that. And then they started to mimic the voices that Byron had for the neighbors. He had voices for all the neighbors. And they said, remember how Byron would mimic Garrett's mom, because Garrett's mom would step out in the street no matter where he was in the neighborhood and just yell, Garrett, Garrett. And so they're doing Garrett at the dinner table and doing all of that. And here's the thing. Then all of a sudden, it got really quiet. And everybody stopped talking, because we all missed him. Dinner wasn't the same. The food didn't taste so good because the table wasn't right. It wasn't complete. Someone who we loved was missing. And I share that with you today just to challenge you to think about who in your life have you lost touch with. Maybe a relationship has been damaged or broken, or you just have lost contact. Who do you need to invite to your table? Who do you need to say, we have a chair for you? Who do you need to invite back into your life? Do you know what that researchers say? That people you've lost touch with or even have had a broken relationship, they're far more ready to respond and come back into your life than you could ever imagine. So who is that chair at your table? Who do you need to reach out to and invite them back into your life? So with every meal comes the cup. And I don't know if you have read Greg Mortensen's book, 3 Cups of Tea. But in 3 Cups of Tea, Greg Mortensen writes about the Balti people. Greg Mortensen was an educator and really just a mountain climber who started traveling through Afghanistan and Pakistan, promoting education for women and girls. He started building schools for girls. And he got to know the Balti people pretty well. And Greg Mortensen writes about how there's an old Balti saying that says, the first time you have a cup of tea with a Balti, you're a stranger. The second time that a Balti invites you into their home for a cup of tea, though, you're an honored guest. The third time they invite you into their home for tea, you are family. Isn't that good? And it's the same in our lives. When Jesus, in Matthew chapter 26, is having this Passover meal for his disciples, he starts to pass a cup around. With every Seder meal, with every Passover meal, there's 4 cups. And the third cup is called Hagula. And Hagula means blessing. It's a blessing cup. And in the Middle East, whether it's in Afghanistan or Pakistan or in Israel, any cup that you share with someone is considered a cup of blessing because water is so scarce. So whether it's tea or whether it's water, whatever you share, it's a blessing. It's the blessing cup. And the question is, who will you bless? Today, you might be wondering what we're serving. Any guesses? Can I hear some guesses? Tea. We got tea. All right, it's not tea. Any other guesses? Someone mumbled grape juice or light beer. It's not light beer, all right? I was raised a Presbyterian. If I was raised Lutheran, then maybe it would be, all right? But I wasn't. No, so I was in California last week watching our Justice College team play with Gary Bradley, a good friend, and we're looking for somewhere for lunch. By the way, we won all 3 games there. Thank you very much. We can applaud that. And so we're looking for lunch, and he sees a place called California Fish Grill. And we go, he says it's amazing. So we go in, and I ordered some Cajun sea bass, which was just next level. And then I go to get a cup of water, but I see their drink fountain has the most interesting choices, and they have agave vanilla cream soda. Hold the phone. So I went back and got a cup and got 3 cups, literally, of agave cream soda. So today, we're serving vanilla cream soda because we don't want to disappoint whoever sits at this table. The thing is, with the cup, David in Psalm 23, he says, my cup, this is Psalm 23:5, he says, my cup is overflowing. And David is saying, this cup of blessing is overflowing for me. And as I look around the room here today, I wonder how many of you is your cup overflowing with blessing? Because if your cup is overflowing, and my guess is there are many of you who have been blessed in different ways. So my invitation, my challenge to you is, who will you share that blessing with? The cup in Scripture was always meant to be a blessing. Even Jesus in John chapter 4, when he talks to the woman at the well, he says, my cup is empty. Could you use your overflowing bucket of water and fill my cup? I think all of us know people in our lives whose cup are empty. The cup, if you've missed it, is a picture of our soul. And we all have people in our lives whose souls are empty and they're hurting, and they need you to bless them. So when God has blessed you and your cup is overflowing, then don't let it just spill on the floor. Turn around and bless someone else. Maybe it's to bless someone financially or with something material. Maybe it's to just bless them with your presence and the time with them and bless them with your friendship. But my challenge today is if you have been blessed, then use your cup of overflowing blessing to bless someone else. Well, today for dinner, we're serving lasagna. I guess it's almost lunchtime. We're serving lasagna. And we're serving lasagna because when Veronica, my wife, talks about the favorite meal of her life, she talks about lasagna. I need the right spatula. All right, here we go. So what happened is when I asked Veronica to marry me and we got engaged, she hadn't met my family, so I invited her to travel to Africa with me and meet my parents. And while we were there, we had a bunch of other college friends with us, and they all insisted on driving to Vanjima in Liberia to visit Alan Robinson, who was at Cal Baptist, and he was back with his parents, and they said, let's go to Vanjima. Well, it was 12 hours through the jungle, so we make the drive, and it's dusty, dirty roads all day long. And we finally get to Vanjima as the sun is setting, and we're starving. We'd just been snacking all day. Veronica clearly remembers, she said, I was famished when we got to Alan's house. And we walked through the door of Alan's home, and we smelled something, and it was amazing. And his mother comes out of the kitchen, and Mrs. Robinson said, I've been making lasagna all day. And so she had us wash up. We washed up real quick, and we sat down. And Veronica said, when we sat down, Mrs. Robinson came out with this piping hot dish of lasagna. And Veronica got real excited, she says, but then it hit her. She looked around the table. There's like 10 of us sitting down. And she thought, oh, no. I'm just going to get one small piece of lasagna, and I'm so hungry. And my wife doesn't eat a lot, but that night she wanted to. And so Mrs. Robinson sets the dish down, and people start to dish it up, and she leaves the room, and then she comes back with a bigger dish of lasagna. And Veronica still says, years and years later, that was the best dinner of my life. I ate as much as I wanted to. Food does that. You know, food has a message. Food is saying something. When you prepare a meal for someone, there's a message in the food. Jesus, if you remember, kept saying that he was the bread of life. This is a very powerful statement because hunger was a real problem in first century Middle East. So when Jesus says, I'm the bread of life, I can meet all your needs, people were highly interested, like, what is he talking about? I want some of this kind of bread. Food is always saying something. Sometimes we miss it. It can be subtle. Nigel Slater is a British journalist. Actually, he's a culinary journalist. And he writes about how when he was 5 years old, around 5, and his mother would tuck him in bed at night, she would kiss him on the cheek. And Nigel said that he would say, Mommy's kisses feel like marshmallows. And he loved his mother's kisses at night. But then when he was 9 years old, Nigel writes, he says that his mother suddenly died. And so his father, every night after that, his father, when he tucked him in bed at night, would take a marshmallow and put it next to his head on the pillow. And so today, we're having marshmallow s'mores pie. Because food, just to remind you that food is always saying something. The food has a message. Meals are a very powerful thing. There's a writer named Alice Joyner, and she has a book titled Eating Together. And let me just go back to what I said a minute ago about Jesus. Jesus' purpose in his meals was this metaphor that the kingdom of heaven is for everyone, and that we all sit at the same table together. So Alice Joyner writes that food is powerful when you eat it. She says, you don't know what's happening when you eat a meal. She said, but when you eat a meal with a person of a different nationality, or you eat a meal with someone of a different socioeconomic background than you, or you eat a meal with someone of a different race than you, she says it changes you. The food has that kind of power. It changes you. She says, as you're sharing that meal with someone who is different than you, then under the surface, you don't know it, but you begin to see that person as more equal to you, and as someone who and she says, the walls and the barriers start to break down between people of different backgrounds and races and nationalities. Meals have that kind of staying power. Well, finally, today we need to get to our guests, don't we? So if we're going to have a meal, we have to have guests. And here's what Jesus says about his guest. Jesus responded by telling still more stories. God's kingdom, he said, is like a king who threw a wedding banquet for his son. And he sent out servants to call in all the invited guests. But they wouldn't come. And he sent out another round of servants, instructing them to tell the guests, look, everything is on the table. The prime rib and lasagna is already being served. Come to the feast. And if we keep reading, the guests still refuse to come. Verse 8, then he told his servants, we have a wedding banquet all prepared, but no guests. The ones I invited weren't up for it. Go out into the busiest intersections in town. Invite everyone you find to the banquet. And the servants went out on the streets and rounded up everyone they laid eyes on, good and bad regardless. And so the banquet was on, and every place, every seat was filled. All right, so if we're going to have a meal here today, we need some guests. So I'm looking for 5 people that will be bold enough and brave enough to come down here. So let me see, any hands? All right, up there, first hand that I'm seeing there. Right here, both of you come on up. That's 1, 2, 3, anyone. Way in the back there, I see you, way in the back. Come on up. Anyone else? Anyone else from this side of the room? Right there. Well, you raise your hand, bud. Come on up, come on up. Don't have second thoughts. He looked at his dad like, save me now, but you raise your hand. All right. So everybody come on up and we need to meet our guest here today. Thank you for taking this risk of lasagna. With every meal, there comes a risk. All right, go ahead and have a seat. Pick a seat. Sit down right there. So as you come up, tell us your name real quick.
I'm Shay.
Shay, thank you. Have a seat. Shay, welcome to the table.
Odelia.
Thank you for being brave enough to have a seat at our table in the middle of the stage. Clayton, good to have you, Clayton. Welcome to the table.
Agnes,
thank you for being here, Agnes.
Jamie,
thank you so much for coming up, Jamie. Good to have you here. Well, let's see. Now, if you remember, Josh already prayed over our meal, so everyone is welcome to start. So go ahead and take out your forks and your knives, and we're going to eat right here. By the way, this is Evan. Evan, I've asked Evan if he could come at my house whenever we have guests. We play jazz music, all right? So Evan's going to play a little bit of jazz over here. Thank you, Evan. So as you get started on our meal together, let me tell you about one of my favorite meals I just had with my wife, Veronica. We were in Maui, and it's our first time there. You can start, bud. Go ahead, dig in, get going. And it's our first time in Maui, and we ate at great restaurants all week, but our last day there, we did the road to Hana. And we had kind of snacked all day. By the time we got to Hana, we were starving. And so we started asking around for a good restaurant. And I wanted to eat by the beach. And finally, someone said, well, if you want to eat by the beach, you got to drive through town. And there's a chicken place there, the Koki's famous Huli Huli chicken. They said, there's just one guy with a shack, so go find. So there's a sign. And so we took their advice, drove out of town, took a left, and started down this road towards Koki's Huli Huli chicken. And we get there, and I'm so excited. I'm starved. The sun is starting to set. It's getting dark. And right when I'm parking and we get out of our car, we start walking towards a shack. It's not a restaurant. It's just a shack. Someone reaches up, and they take the sign that says open, and they turn it to close. And I'm like, oh, no. And I could see that the owner who had been preparing the chicken, that he turns to his family and friends that were hanging out in lawn chairs with him. He turns to them, and he motions for them to go get their food. Now, all the guests have eaten, everybody who's been at the beach all day, now it's just his family. And they get in line. So I say to Veronica, let's get in line. And so we did. We got in line, and I'm thinking maybe nobody will notice. You know, we're the Howleys, and they're Hawaiians, and I was just hoping nobody would see that we were, not part of the family, just hoping to blend in, so I just tried to go small. And so we stood in the back of the line, and all his family was served, and they all sat down at picnic tables around the shack. And then it was us. And the young woman behind the counter, you can keep going, keep going. The young one behind the counter, she says, today's my birthday. And so we said, happy birthday. And we were so excited to be here on your birthday. And then she looked at us with a smile. She said, I have one more chicken. And so she served it. Here's a plate she served up for us. And we shared this. And so we sat. It was his family and us feeling like locals and feeling like Hawaiian family. We sat down and ate huli huli chicken. Huli means, by the way, turn. You turn the chicken on the grill over and over. And I share that because when Jesus had meals like this, it was for family. He was creating an all-inclusive family, a new kind of family. That's why they use brothers and sisters language in the New Testament, because when you share a meal, the barriers come down, the walls come down, and we eat as family. That's why I think dinner tables are the best symbol of the Jesus kind of church. For the Jews of Jesus' day, life divided at the table. Bad things were happening in their meals because they had started to make meals, yes, sacred, but also segregated. Jews refused to eat with anyone who was a sinner. They refused to eat with foreigners. Jews only ate with Jews. And then Jesus came along and he turned their table traditions upside down. No, we're not. But his manners were so bad at the dinner table, they wanted to kill him. But Jesus used tables to grow this new kind of family. That's why in almost every chapter of Luke, we read about dinners and tables, because food is more than something that fills our stomach, isn't it? A meal is a warm welcome. A meal is a statement of acceptance. A meal is an embrace of a kind. A meal is a statement that you are wanted here. A meal is a show of solidarity. A meal is a statement of love. Another person has been invited in. And so as you eat here and all of our friends join us for this meal, I want to remind everyone here, Josh, come on up. As Josh and our team comes up, that one of the most powerful things we can ever do as Christians and followers of Jesus Christ is to share a meal with others, because it's a reminder that we are family, that we are one family serving Jesus Christ. With every meal comes a risk. The lasagna could be runny. The meringue may not set. The conversation might stall. And it might get a little awkward. But Jesus wanted us to know that when we sit together, we're family. We are one. It's one table, that here at the Grove, you are loved, and so is everyone else in this room. Thank you for coming and sitting at the table, everybody. Can we thank them? Thank you so much, church. You can